I'll be stepping back today and turning you over to the really good hands of Crystal Blair. But welcome, Kristi. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Good morning, Miss Kristi.
Good morning, Crystal.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
For all of our participants watching, thank you for joining our May Tea Talk. We're going to be talking with Miss Kristi Lent. She is Miss Wheelchair Alaska USA 2022, and she's going to be talking about traveling with a disability, which is actually the platform that she is running on for Miss Wheelchair USA. So Miss Kristi, if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of talk a little bit about you.
Sure. Thank you, Crystal, so much for having me, and hello to all of the participants out there. My name is Kristi Lent, and I am the first woman in Alaska to hold the title of Miss Wheelchair Alaska USA, and I will be competing for the national title this July in Akron, Ohio. I moved to Alaska around almost 22 years ago, in about 2001, after I graduated from the University of Tulsa with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a minor in social studies, sociology and legal studies. And I actually worked at Access Alaska as my first job back right after I moved up here, and I worked there for about 5 years, and then I moved on to the state of Alaska and worked there for about 5 or 6 years, and decided that I wanted to take a little bit more time for myself and enjoy life and switch careers. So I became a professional photographer, and my husband and I, we've been doing that since about 2010. And one of my favorite things to photograph is the Iditarod sled dog race. I am the only woman in a wheelchair to be able to have press credentials and photograph the race. And we do that both here in Anchorage and the restart in Willow and the finish in Nome. My platform is Travel Without Barriers, and I chose that because I've been flying since I was about 6 hours old. Had to have my first life flight plane ride, helicopter ride, I'm not quite sure which one it was, from Boise, Idaho, where I was born, in a small hospital, to Salt Lake City, where they could do my first back closure and shunt placement. I was born with spina bifida. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. And so yeah, I like to tell people I've been flying since I was 6 hours old and been doing it ever since, and got the love of flying from my dad, who's a now retired professional helicopter pilot, and took on this platform to hopefully raise awareness about the need for more accessible accommodations on commercial airliners, especially with regards to having an accessible lavatories, so that people with disabilities, whether it be wheelchairs or pretty much everybody, because those bathrooms are so dang small, that we can get more accessible lavatories on board. And the bigger issue that I've been advocating for with Department of Transportation is more regulations, tighter fines and procedures for airlines to follow, so that wheelchairs aren't damaged on a daily basis. Around 25 wheelchairs on average are damaged every day by the airlines. So that's the main fight that I'm fighting for and advocating for with my platform.
Thank you for that introduction. So you had mentioned that you've been flying technically since you were 6 days old, rather, but in generally speaking, do you enjoy travel just in general?
Oh yes, I am an adrenaline junkie. I love traveling. Haven't gotten to do a whole lot overseas other than take a cruise to the Bahamas. And trying to think, as far as outside the United States, I think that's about the furthest that I've gone. And I've visited, I would say, about 2/3 of the United States. Haven't quite made it back east very much to the New England area, but been to Hawaii a few times. My last trip to Hawaii was actually in 2015 or 16, I believe, and was quite the adventure taking my husband there for the first time. I had already been a couple of times. So I love to travel.
Is there anything specific that you enjoy the most?
Obviously, getting to the destination is not necessarily my favorite part. Just, with all of the headaches that come with packing and then managing the airport and everything. But I love exploring new cultures and meeting new people from different states and around the world. And I love landscape photography, so I love going to places where I can get outdoors in nature and use my photography skills to photograph different parts of the country. I just love everything about it, I think.
So given that you've traveled quite extensively, whether it's, lower 48 wise and going to Hawaii, things like that, are there forms of transportation that you've traveled on that are more disability friendly than others?
Probably the most common answer that everyone could relate to is car rides. I probably, out of all forms of travel, enjoy a good road trip. Especially, I love living in Alaska just for that reason alone. You can drive 6-8 hours practically and still be in the same state, but get to experience a whole lot of different adventures and tourist attractions. So I love traveling by car. That's probably my favorite, and I would probably say the most wheelchair friendly, as long as you've got either someone with you that can help with the wheelchair, or if you're more independent and can transfer easily, things like that. Least favorite, ironically, is probably cruise ships, and it's not for the reason that you think. I actually get seasick. So and
You still go on them.
Right, yeah. I've only been like on one big major cruise, and that was back in high school. And embarrassing story, I threw up in front of all my classmates on the pool deck about the second day out. So Dramamine is my friend when I'm on the high seas. And the other thing that is complicated with cruise travel are the excursions and being able to board off ship. Some locations you have to get into those smaller boats. I forget exactly what they're called. And I apologize if you hear background noise. It's either my cat or they are also doing road construction in my neighborhood that just started like yesterday.
That's okay.
Yeah. So cruising can be a little bit more difficult, I would say, than other forms of transportation, but luckily there are more travel agencies and those that specialize in accessible cruising that I've been looking into. So I'm excited to start venturing out and doing that more once things kind of calm down a little bit with the pandemic and feel safer to travel. Air travel is not necessarily my least favorite. It's probably the most complicated because of all of the hurdles that you have to go just in buying your ticket and making sure that you've got the right accommodations beforehand and carrying that all the way through to your destination. And then, of course, making sure that your wheelchair doesn't get damaged.
Right. So with airplane travel kind of being one of the most difficult for you or for somebody in a wheelchair, do you know a little bit about, and especially with your father, being a retired pilot, do you know a little bit about the Air Carrier Access Act?
I do.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
It was passed I believe it was either 1986 or 83. I apologize. I can't remember the date right off the top of my head. A lot of people confuse the ADA as also applying to the airline industry. And unfortunately, it doesn't. And that's because the Air Carrier Act was passed before the ADA, and it's got its own set of provisions that the airline industry has been very reluctant to update and follow through with. So certain parts of the ADA do apply and are very similar to the Air Carrier Act, but the Air Carrier Act, for example, right now specifies that an accessible lavatory or bathroom only has to be on the larger planes that have the dual aisles, your 737s, DC-10s, Airbuses, the larger planes. And the reason why they did that, and it boggles the mind, because back when they set up the Air Carrier Act and they came up with this regulation, at the time, the larger planes were the ones that were taking the longer flights across country, overseas, etc. So the smaller, 747s and what most people fly today commercially were used for an hour to 2 hours of flight. And the argument that was made was that you might not have to use the bathroom on those shorter flights. And so that's why they only put it on those larger planes. However, as we know, these days, almost all flights are like a 747, 737. It's the 747 that has the double aisle. So they've been very reluctant to update that regulation. Right now, I'm working with Department of Transportation along with a lot of other stakeholders and disability advocates to update the regulation for the accessible lavatory, that it be mandatory on all commercial airlines. Right now, what they're looking at is about 18 to 20 year time frame from when the regulation gets passed. So basically what we're looking at from May 27th, when public comment closes on the current issue right now with the bathrooms, if that regulation goes forth and is implemented, airlines, Delta, America, Alaska Airlines, all those guys will have 18 to 20 years to make the bathroom, the lavatory on commercial airlines wheelchair accessible.
So with lavatories needing to be wheelchair accessible, within the next 18 to 20 years, is right now with the way that the aisles are, and having flown quite frequently myself, are you even able to get a wheelchair up and down the aisles right now?
I personally am not, and I know the majority of wheelchair users can't. I do know that there is a company, I don't know the name, and I don't know a lot about them, so I don't want to promote them, as far as what they do, but I know of a company that's in Las Vegas that does custom chairs. And right now there's an Instagram user that I'm following, and he specifically had his chair custom made so that it fits the width of the aisle on planes. Right now, what you have to do if you're in a wheelchair or you need extra assistance getting to the bathroom and you're unable to walk for whatever reason, they are supposed to have one of the aisle chairs that they use to board people with mobility issues on planes. There's also supposed to be one on every flight, and flight attendants are supposed to have that available and assist you to and from the bathroom. Otherwise, there really is no other way unless you are willing to crawl on your hands and knees to get to the bathroom.
That was actually one of the questions in the chat, was how you being in a wheelchair, how you use a lavatory. knowing what is required for a person with a disability or a person with a wheelchair to use the restroom on an airplane. Any flights that you've been on, have you found that they don't actually have those chairs on board?
There have been a few times where it has not been available, and I am one of many who I don't drink several hours before the flight. I know some people have to extend that even further and go almost, 12 hours or more with very little liquid. I try not to drink very much on the plane. It's in essence dehydrating myself just so that I don't have that fear of needing to use the restroom. And it's not always possible. I mean, I think I've even had instances where my husband has picked me up and carried me to the bathroom.
And I know that when you and I had first met, when we were first talking, we were talking about wheelchairs actually, and you had mentioned earlier, wheelchairs being damaged on flights. And especially over the last few years, they've been broken, they've been even lost. And knowing that someone's wheelchair is literally their lifeline and it's like an extension of themselves. Have you had this happen? Has a chair of yours been broken or lost,
Yes.
even recently over the last year or two?
Definitely. There's been minor instances with the wheelchair. My current wheelchair, luckily, it has never flown. It's what I call a virgin wheelchair. I just got it last week. And the chair that I had previous to this was most recently damaged in 2018, which was pretty much my last big flight, because then the pandemic started and everything. And Alaska Airlines, what they did, I've got a power assist wheelchair. So it's virtually a manual assist, a manual wheelchair, but the wheels have a battery component to help enable me to push a little easier, so I'm not wearing out my shoulders. We specifically tell the airlines, which is usually Alaska Airlines for up here, that's usually the main airline that we fly. We tell them and instruct them before we get on the flight, and we even, if we can, try to have one of the baggage handlers come up from the ground so that they can see what we're talking about. And we specifically tell them, this chair cannot be broken down any further than what you see right now. Do not try to disengage the battery. We have the thing, if you have a battery for your wheelchair, whether it be a power chair or a power assist chair, certain batteries, the lithium ion batteries, must be disengaged from the power source. And that's a safety issue. For my chair, it's a nickel hydride battery, at least the one on the chair that got broke was. And so it's not as much of a safety hazard, but just to avoid argument, with the Certus and the gate agents, what we do is we go ahead and take the battery out and just put it overhead, in our carry-on, because it's a dry cell battery, it's not gonna leak. So I always tell them, don't mess with the wires on the back of the chair. Don't try to collapse it any further than what you see. You will break it. I will be upset. This is the speech I give every single time that I fly. It never seems to work because we always get it back in some kind of condition where we need to repair it. And that's what happened in 2018. We landed in Seattle for our layover. We were flying down to Las Vegas for a few days. And we landed in Seattle for our layover. And by the time they finally got the aisle chair and got me off the plane, which in and of itself is a whole nother story, with the length of time that takes. By the time I got out there, my husband was already out there arranging, the wheelchair and our luggage and everything. And he had noticed right away that they had tried to disengage the wiring system, and they actually stripped the wires almost to the point where it was non-functional. Luckily, since we've run into similar issues before, my husband carries an emergency repair kit with him. And luckily we had duct tape in the bag, and that's how we had to fix it, excuse the pun, literally on the fly, just to get to our next gate so that we could continue on with our trip. When we landed in Las Vegas, it was further damaged. I think it was the wheels, and it was either the handlebars or the push rims. I can't quite remember. And there's a process with the airlines that you go through if your wheelchair is damaged, and most of the airlines use a third party company that they contract with to either repair the chair if possible, or to replace the chair. And replacement of the chair does have to be at the expense of the airlines. What they will do is they will try their hardest to only do repairs. In some situations, especially up here in Alaska, where we only have like maybe one or two really good DME providers to be able to fix chairs, I think for my repairs, it took about 3 months for them to fix. What we did find out from the representative that came out, actually had to come all the way out to the hotel that we were staying at to look at the chair and see if it was even fixable in the time frame that we were going to be in Las Vegas. And it wasn't. We were only there for like 3 days, I think 3 or 4 days. It was a quick conference trip that I had for work at the time. And he told us so many horror stories. You know, I could almost probably take up the whole hour telling you all of the different horror stories that he has told, you know, that he was telling us. But what it comes down to is airlines actually budget, I think it was like 5 to 10% of their annual budget just for wheelchair repairs, because they know it's going to happen. So rather than take the time to train their employees and the ground crew on how to properly handle wheelchairs, and granted, yes, there's numerous styles and configurations of wheelchairs, but what it comes down to is they just need to listen to the passenger with a mobility device and take extra care. It's not luggage. They can't just throw it around. They need to handle it like they would someone boarding a plane, because when you break someone's wheelchair, it's the equivalent of breaking my legs. And I am fortunate enough that I'm in a manual chair, and its primary function for me is mobility. For those in power chairs, I know that there are power wheelchair users that need their chair to help them, you know, enter their home. They've got their Alexa, you know, the light switches are controlled through the chair, temperature control for the house, you know, things like that. So when you break a person's wheelchair, it's not just that you're inconveniencing them for a trip or, you know, returning back home. You are significantly altering their life and their lifestyle. So yeah, back to the story. That was in November of 2018, and the repairs did not get finalized, I believe, until like January or February.
That was actually going to be my follow-up question, was, in your personal opinion, what do you think an airline can do to ensure that that doesn't happen again? And you had mentioned training for baggage handlers as well.
I think it's so simple. It's more training and holding the airlines to a stricter standard, you know, whether that be fines or additional training that they have to do. Right now, they only have to show Department of Transportation that they have trained their employees, you know, they as a whole, like with the baggage handlers, they only have to do that training once every 3 years. And the turnover for those positions are so high that it doesn't make any sense to me that they only have to prove that they're doing this type of training once every 3 years.
We had a couple questions in the chat box that I was going to throw over. So we had somebody ask, do you know of anyone who's been denied an airline flight due to having a disability?
Personally, no. I know it has happened. I know I have been threatened to, use kind of a stronger word there, of not flying. Actually, I take all of this back because I just remembered a story without too much information. I flew to Chicago when I was in junior high. It was for a class field trip. I was in a club where we got to go to Chicago for the day. On the return flight home, I had started to get sick shortly before the flights, and I got really sick and had to use the bathroom on board the plane, like literally as people are still boarding. And it was significant enough that they couldn't hold the flight up any longer. And so they basically told me I couldn't fly and that me and one of the teacher chaperones had to get off the flight. And so we ended up having to stay in Chicago overnight, luckily at the airline's expense. So not only, did that happen, it was embarrassing, it was demeaning. Yeah, so I know it has happened, but other than that one story, I don't personally know of anyone that's happened to.
Do you know of any resources to assist with the security process at the airport? As someone who requires a lot of medical equipment, feeding tube, IV supplies, and liquids, I found my last experience degrading and honestly embarrassing because I was searched and my entire medical suitcase was taken apart. Any resources to assist someone with this process? And this person also has actually not flown since because it's too much for them now.
I am so sorry that happened, and I can relate. I almost get more terrified of going through security than I do on the actual flight. Without giving you my personal resource, because it's my brother and he will be very upset if I give out his personal email address. My brother actually works for TSA and he helps train the TSA agents, at all of the different airports. And he's in a high enough position now that he helps write the training and visits different airports throughout the country to make sure that they're doing things correctly. He and I have gone round and round on this very topic, but he has given me some resources that you can use if you do feel violated in any way at the screening process. You can contact the Department of Transportation and file a complaint. There is also a number, I think my husband just grabbed it. Yes, sorry, I meant to have this. So there is a TSA hotline that people can call. It's called TSA Cares. And I don't know, Crystal, I don't know if you want me to try to put this in the chat, or I can send this to you later if you want to send this out to the attendees. But it is, if you go to www.tsa.gov/contact-center/form FORM/cares, and call that number or the number that's there on the website, or go to the website 72 hours before your flight, and you can talk over your concerns and your questions with them. As far as going through security, you can always request a private screening if you feel uncomfortable having them do the screening in public. My personal preference is to not have a personal screening, and that is mainly so that they are staying transparent and the rest of the public gets to see how people in wheelchairs are treated. That's my personal preference. I know not everyone feels comfortable with that, and that's perfectly fine. And it is your right to request a private screening. If they don't offer it to you and that is something that you want, then you can request it. And, depending on how bold you want to be, you can wait until you get that private screening. It, might cause a consequence of you missing your flight, just FYI, but definitely get that private screening if that's what you want to do. As far as medical equipment, you are allowed an extra carry-on bag. Anything that is medical equipment does not count towards your personal carry-on bag limit. So anything, from my wheelchair battery to my skis that I use for when I know we're going someplace where I'm going to need those, I count that as medical equipment. Any of my cathing supplies, incontinence supplies, I'll count toward medical supplies. So make sure all of that stuff is labeled before you leave. With prescriptions, a couple of things that are very important with prescriptions. If at all possible, you need to try to have that or all of your prescriptions in the original bottle that they came from, that has the medication name and dosage, so that it looks, legit. And make sure that you carry all of your medications with you as carry-on. Do not put them in checked baggage. And back to the TSA screening process, what I have found that is really helpful in this day of age of, post 9/11 and COVID and everything else, just be as friendly as you can with the TSA agents while also asserting your rights. If you are unable to move in the direction that they are requesting, usually they ask if you can come forward, so they can search down the back side of your back and back of the wheelchair. If you're unable to do any kind of movements that you're not comfortable with, you need to let them know that. Usually the good TSA agents will make sure to ask. And even if you're not comfortable in doing those movements, just tell them simply that you can't. And I don't really think I've ever run into a situation where they haven't respected that. If you have shoes, okay, everybody has their flights with shoes. If you have prosthetics and it's difficult to remove your prosthetics or your shoes, let them know that, and let them know that you can't remove your shoes. For me, it's difficult for me to remove my shoes even when I'm not wearing my braces, and I tell them I can't take off my shoes. You do not owe them an explanation as to why you can't. You just simply tell them, because of my disability, I'm unable to do what you are requesting.
Thank you for that. Let's see here. Do you always, excuse me, do you always make it aware for flights and cruise ships that you're on of your disabilities? And if so, does it help in accommodating and in getting the things that you need?
Yes, I do. And it does help. The way I look at life is people are not aware of what they don't know. And if you don't make your disability known when you're traveling well ahead of time, then my personal feeling is it's as much on you as it is on the airline or the cruise ship or whatever the mode of travel is. People, they don't know what they don't know. So you have to be your own best advocate and let people know how you need assistance, not necessarily why you need assistance. I don't go around telling the airlines I have spina bifida, I have hydrocephalus. They don't need to know the nitty gritty details. They just need to know I'm in a wheelchair, I need that extra assistance. These are the accommodations that I need. And to do so in advance, it not only helps out the airport and the airline, it's going to just make your trip that much smoother and give you a lot less headache, hopefully. It doesn't always work out. There's been instances where we've made the airline fully aware ahead of time that, you know, I'm in a wheelchair, I've got a dry cell battery on the wheelchair, I need an aisle chair, just everything. We get to the airline, or I mean the airport, and they don't have all of those notes, and it's like I have to tell them all over again. So it's a little bit of legwork ahead of time, but I do think that it is important, not only just for your peace of mind and making sure that things are getting taken care of, but it's going to make your trip that much smoother, hopefully.
Gotcha. Has anyone at the airlines tried to accuse you of bringing a damaged wheelchair and then trying to get them to fix it? The person who asked this question has had that happen to them.
I am so sorry that happened. Personally, not my own personal wheelchair. I've not had that happen. Oh, sorry. My husband is here. He's listening in the background and hoping my short-term memory lasts here. Another good piece of advice is take pictures of your wheelchair before the flights and take pictures of any important parts that you feel might get damaged. For me, it's the wiring system where the battery is connected for the wheels, any removable parts that you don't want to necessarily take on the plane. It is recommended that you take any removable parts, armrest, headrest, joystick, you know, for power chairs, anything that you can take off, it's recommended to take off. I know that's an extra hassle, you know, because you're already shoving in so much into your carry-on anyways. So take off what you feel comfortable, lugging around a little extra, and then whatever is left on the chair and the condition of the chair, take pictures. And don't take pictures a week ahead of time. We're talking take pictures the day of, get to the airport in plenty of time so that you can take those pictures. You know, that 2 hours it's going to fly by really, really fast. So take pictures of your chair from all different angles so that if something like this does happen, and it is unfortunate, and this wouldn't be the first time I've heard this actually, you can show the airlines, this was the condition of the chair right before we left. This is the condition of it now.
And having the timestamp right on that photo would make it a lot easier to kind of prove your point that it happened right then.
Right. Because if they see, well, you took this picture a week ago, how do we know it wasn't damaged, you know, between when you took it and now? That's why, you know, again, I mean, even if it's just 24 hours, but the closer you can do it to your flight, the better. And it's, you know, it's not like you have to take, you know, 20 different pictures. Take pictures of the most important parts that are likely to break. I have had my armrest damaged quite a bit. I've also had the wheels damaged, you know, bent. So any part of the frame that you feel could potentially get bent or broken are the parts that I would focus on.
How to address blatant discrimination from an airline crew. Although it's very difficult for her, my parent chooses to walk from the airplane entrance to her seat. The person who checked her in misunderstood this and asked the crew to be ready to help her to her seat. They did not have the small aisle wheelchair on this particular plane. My parent barely managed to get herself to her seat. A crew member aggressively leaned over to her and spat the words, "Did you really expect us to carry you to your seat?" My parent was already overwhelmed by the effort and pain of getting herself to the seat. She felt attacked and unsafe for the rest of the flight, and she won't fly the airline again. How would you handle that discrimination from the airline crew? Or how to address, rather?
I would personally tell that airline employee that as soon as we land, I will be contacting the Department of Justice and filing a complaint. And also the other thing that you can do when you land, you can't really do this particular step in flight because they're not on the flight, but at every airport, there's I believe it's a CSO officer, and those are the airline employees that get called in to handle resolutions right at the gate. Sometimes it's right before a flight if a passenger is unruly or whatever. But there's been multiple times where we have called for a CSO officer when we land. And I've never necessarily been accused of like faking my disability, but I have been reprimanded from airline employees for asserting my rights, or even just getting upset because I missed a connection, a connecting flight because they were late in getting me off the plane.
So for those of you that don't know, there is a such thing as a travel companion for those with disabilities. And Kristi, can you kind of explain what role a travel companion can play? And I know your husband travels with you a lot to help facilitate a smooth trip. And what are your thoughts of a person with a disability wanting to travel solo?
Before I answer that, my husband grabbed the phone number this is the phone number for the Department of Transportation. And Crystal, if you want to put this in the chat. So if they feel, they've been mistreated in any way by an airline employee during a flight, pre-flight, post-flight, you can call the Department of Transportation, and that phone number is 202-366-4000. Or they can also do it through the federal relay for those that are deaf or hard of hearing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, traveling with a companion. I have flown solo before. I prefer flying, with my husband or other family members. Just more so out of convenience, so I'm not having to lug around a whole bunch of luggage. One thing that you can do if you're flying solo but you need assistance down to the gate or from the gate at your final destination, if you have a family member or companion, you can, when you go to the airport and let's say that they are there assisting you to get to your flight, ask the ticket counter agent, not the gate agent, the agents that are at the ticket counter, let them know that you need assistance down there, and can you have a companion guest pass that will allow them to go with you through security and all the way down to the gate. And then if they are picking you up from the airport, they can do the same thing. They just go to the ticket counter and they say, hey, my wife Kristi is coming in on such and such flight. She's in a wheelchair. I need a companion guest pass, I believe is what they're called, to go meet her at the gate. And if they try to give you grief, about, well, there's, we have employees that can help get her down there or, get her off the flight, just stand your ground and say, I would prefer that my companion be with me. Please issue me a companion pass.
Thank you. And then, do you know if the resources like the TSA Cares that you had talked about earlier, are they available for all flights, like in-state flights, or just major airline or major flights?
That's for all flights.
That the TSA
That the TSA, provides for, all in-state travel, airline travel overseas, leaving from the US. Not quite, I'm not a little fuzzy on like international travel.
As long as TSA is searching.
Yeah, as long as TSA is searching, then yeah.
And then what tips can you give to the accessible travel, especially those who haven't traveled before because they've always just been anxious but really want to?
would say don't be afraid to travel. Don't be afraid rather to fly. It can be done, and it just is going to take a little bit of extra patience on your part, and plan ahead. As far as useful tips, like I said, I think the medications are a real important part to remember to put in your carry-on. Also in your carry-on, if this applies to you, it applies to me. I always make sure I've got an extra change of clothing. You know, accidents happen, literally. You know, we all poop and pee. So, so anything that you, for your carry-on, if you're flying, anything that you would need should your flight get delayed during a layover, medications, extra clothing, catheters, you know, any important medical equipment that you would need in, say, the next 24 hours, make sure all of that goes in your carry-on. And like I said, anything, you know, medical, if you can, try to put all of that kind of in one carry-on and have that be your medical carry-on, and that will not count toward your personal carry-on.
And then the last question that I actually have for you, it's to bring it back more local. So you have been in Alaska for a long time. You've traveled extensively lower 48. You've traveled, you love Hawaii. We know you've gone to Hawaii, and you traveled around the state. With being local and even the roadways in Anchorage and things like that, are there any places interstate and locally around Anchorage, Matsu Valley, things like that, that you find are not very accessible for an individual with physical disabilities?
Unfortunately, Anchorage is the worst city in the state when it comes to snow removal off of our streets. I'm currently working with Forrest Dunbar and the city council on that particular issue. I met with him a couple of weekends ago. Happened to be at Comic-Con. I was at that. And so we talked about how just the streets in Anchorage need to have better snow removal, not just off of the streets, but also off of the sidewalks. And so hopefully over the next year, we can implement some, you know, procedure or best practice there. It's ironic. We went to Nome for the first time this year to see the Iditarod finish. Their streets up there are better maintained than here in Anchorage. And I think in large part that has to do with the disability advocates that they have up there. Denise Gilroy is the CEO of ARC Access, and she's done a wonderful job in trying to make Nome as accessible as possible, which, given how remote it is, I was very pleasantly surprised at how accessible it was. There were more ramps than I expected to see, which was a really lovely surprise. Other than that, I would say kind of the Kenai Homer area is a little less accessible than most of the other places that I've traveled in the state. Oh, and Valdez. Valdez has probably the worst ramp in the state. I don't even know how they can call it a ramp because it feels like about a 90-degree angle on the, I think it's pretty much the one and only hotel for Valdez. It's been a while since I've been there, so it might have changed, but I went down there with some friends probably about 10 years ago, and that ramp was a nightmare.
And you'll be traveling in July for the Miss Wheelchair USA, correct?
Yes.
And you're going to, is it in Ohio?
It's in Ohio. Yeah, it's in Ohio, Akron, Ohio, kind of a little suburb of Akron right there. And so I'm one of the few contestants that will have to fly to get there. And what we've elected to do is my brand new wheelchair, just picked it up last week, like I said, I'm not going to use this wheelchair terribly much before we leave, but it most likely will be the chair that I fly with. So everybody hope and pray that it doesn't get damaged.
Well, we do wish you great luck. One, just in traveling safely, and every part of your chair that you are taking with you gets there safely and things like that as well. And we wish you luck, and actually thank you for representing Alaska Wheelchair and in the Miss Wheelchair USA coming up in July. And we do want to thank you for jumping in and talking to us for this hour on traveling around with disabilities, and especially without barriers, knowing how difficult it can be for individuals. And we thank you for even making that your platform, so it's at the forefront of what people are talking about. And if you're comfortable, if you can email me the information for the open comment section before May 27th, I can make sure to get that out to all of our attendees as well. And if those want to make open comments, you're more than welcome to before, she had mentioned before May 27th. And just as a friendly reminder to everybody, we do choose 3 door prize winners. So those will be sent out here within the next week or 2. I will be contacting those who had won. And if you guys want to join us in June, we are actually, excuse me, I apologize. We are actually going to be talking about reproductive rights for individuals with disabilities with the Ketchimek Bay Family Planning Clinic. So feel free to join us in June for that as well. So thank you again, Kristi. Everyone is in the comment section rooting for you in July, so we're all very excited about it.
Thank you. Just a quick little plug, probably about mid-June is when the Miss Wheelchair USA pageant will open up the phone lines for people to call in and vote for their favorite contestant for the People's Choice Awards. So as soon as I have that information available, I will send that on to Crystal so she can pass that along out. And
absolutely,
people can find me on Facebook under Miss Wheelchair Alaska USA. Don't forget the USA, that's important.
yes,
and
absolutely.
I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, and just love and appreciate all of the support that you guys can give.
We're getting lots of looks in the chat section, and everybody is thanking you for the resources that you've been able to give for them as well, especially with the Department of Transportation as well. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. The Department of Transportation is your best friend. You know, they feel maybe like your worst enemy, but I know that the current administration is working really, really hard to try to resolve some of these issues. About a month ago, I did participate in that Department of Transportation meeting with Secretary Pete Buttigieg and some of the other stakeholders. And so we are diligently working on this. And like I said, that public comment is open until May 27th. I'm also working with the Disability Law Center here in Anchorage, and we do have a sample comment that is ready to go. I will contact them later today and see if they have published that yet. And then that way, for people that aren't comfortable, you know, in writing or are unable to type, you know, write out a comment, they can do this pre-selected comment.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you to your husband for making sure we had that information from the background. We appreciate it.
He says thank you and gave a thumbs up.
All right. Thanks again, Kristi. And again, I will make sure to get all follow-up information out to all of our attendees through email. And if you have won a door prize, look for an email from me.
Awesome. Thank you, Crystal, so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Have a great day, everyone. And we hope to see you in June.
Bye.
Bye.